Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the RCAST Research Center for Advanced Science and Technology in this very good afternoon. My name is Satoshi Ikeuchi, Professor of Religion and Global Security of RCAST Research Center for Advanced Science and Technology of the University of Tokyo. And also I'm a founding chair for the Rhodes project think tank in the University of Tokyo. Rhodes stand for RCAST Open Laboratory for Emergence Strategies. So in this project, we are organizing a wide-ranging of events and symposium seminars, most of them international and also a multidisciplinary. This time, it's a very good opportunity for us to recreate this our event. This time, co-organized with a GIF, Global Infrastructure Fund Research Foundation, Japan. And in this occasion, I want to just introduce all the speakers. They are already here, ready for speak. So I keep my opening remarks very, very short. And it's my great honor to host this international seminar, or rather symposium, and huge list of eminent speakers. And the titles: Securing the Seabed, Shaping the Seas, Undersea Infrastructure, and the Geopolitics of Maritime Order in the Indo-Pacific. And in this occasion of opening remarks, I'd like to express my utmost gratitude to the GIF, Global Infrastructure Fund Research Foundation Japan, and its CEO, Professor Emeritus Mikiyasu Nakayama. Thank you very much for making this occasion for us. Professor Nakayama brought all these speakers in this place today. This seminar will explore key factors that are reshaping security in the Indo-Pacific amid intensifying competition among major powers. The main themes will be the naval strategies and arrangements being coordinated among major countries in the Indo-Pacific, and the impact of technological innovations on maritime security. One of those issues specifically chosen and highlighted in the seminar is the security of critical infrastructure on the seabed. What is the cause of the frequent cut and disconnections of submarine power and communication cables in recent years, both in the Baltic Sea and also East China Sea, including area around Taiwan? What can we do to ensure the security of undersea infrastructure so crucial in civilian and military purposes? There has never been a time when the joint research and coordination has been more necessary between Japan and its allies and partners. We have invited speakers who tackled with this issue from various expertise. Each presentation will present new research findings on when, where, and how important undersea assets could be targeted during a period of heightened tension, and will also examine the strategic significance of joint naval exercises and the foreign policies of Japan and other countries that share its values. As the head of Rhodes, a university-based think tank and the organizer of the entire project of its security and diplomatic research program, I have been giving special attention to this topic of the security of undersea cable issue. For example, in March this year, I had the opportunity to discuss the same issue at a roundtable held here in the same venue, also inviting Dr. Kitagawa, inviting a director of Estonian Defense Security Studies Institute, which is also faced with the same issue as well as those issues in East China Sea. On that occasion, we invited again, yes, Dr. Keizo Kitagawa, a former officer of the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force. And I'm happy to tell you that Captain Kitagawa once again accepted my invitation to participate in this discussion together with all these distinguished speakers. I'm also happy to call you Kitagawa Sensei because Captain Kitagawa became a professor at Keio from this April. So congratulations. The topic of the undersea cable requires a careful discussion among experts with various fields of specialization based on technical, practical, and theoretical backgrounds. The fact that submarine cables are frequently cut is a grave reality itself that must be acknowledged. However, it is important to note that it is not easy to conclude whether these cuts were intentional or not, or who was responsible for them. That is the issue of attribution, which is very difficult. Many cases of cable cuts are also attributed to force majeure, caused by fishing activities and the operation of anchors during ship anchoring. We cannot rule out the possibility that submarine cable cuts occurring in strategically tense waters, such as the East China Sea, near Taiwan, or the Baltic Sea, are due to force majeure. Some are not intentional, some are. Furthermore, even if some of these cuts were known as a result of intentional sabotage, attribution would not be straightforwardly done. It is generally understood that determining who carried out submarine cable cuts is as difficult as, if not more difficult than determining who carried out cyber attacks. Whether submarine cable cuts were intentional or unavoidable accidents must be confirmed based on technical and intelligence expertise. It is essential to gather expertise and develop countermeasures to identify the perpetrators of submarine cable cuts and hold them accountable. To strengthen surveillance through the analysis of AIS, automatic identification system data, and to deploy additional patrol vessels whose primary mission is to protect submarine cables are the possible measures to be taken, not easily implemented. So is it possible to set up an international framework to intensify inspection of vessels that disabled their AIS systems? These are my very amateuristic questions posed at the outset of this great experts panel. So I'd like to leave it here to the respected speakers, experts, and commentators for analysis and proposal. So first, we have keynote speech by a Professor Cannon and Matsuo-san. So we take turns to present your keynote, please.
Very good. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ikeuchi Sensei, for hosting us at RCAST, University of Tokyo today. It's a pleasure to be back here. Thank you, Nakayama Sensei and Ms. Sakamoto from GIF Japan for putting this together in concert with RCAST. I know it's been an incredible amount of work, and I'm very grateful for that. It's delightful to be part of this panel and to see so many friends and colleagues here, both up at the table as well as in the audience. But without further ado, we've got a lot of ground to cover, so I'll begin my comments along with my researcher and research colleague and friend, Matsuo-san. We're going to talk about undersea cables, as Ikeuchi Sensei mentioned. I don't think any of you will be surprised when I say they're very important. Except I'm going to make a caveat here. Undersea cables themselves are actually not that important. What's important is the data that traverses them. Okay, so the cables themselves, while they traverse the ocean floors, are conduits. And so the more connectivity we have, the greater assets that they are for our societies. You already mentioned the recent cable cuts in the Taiwan Strait, in the Red Sea, in the Baltic Sea, just over the last year alone. And there does seem to be a trend in hybrid warfare contexts driven by geopolitical rivalries in general. But look, 98 to 99% of global digital traffic traverses these cables each and every second of every day. Our financial intelligence and the backbone of our generative AI, ChatGPT, et cetera, it all rests on these cables. So again, when I state they're important, I'm in some respects making an understatement. This is a map showing you the spaghetti strands, the routes of cables around Eurasia. You can see how where the choke points are, where they're particularly vulnerable, say in the Strait of Malacca, for example, or the Strait of Hormuz, and where they go. They're ubiquitous. Some places have multiple connections like Japan. Some places have one connection like Fiji. But cables are not new. We began to lay cables in the mid-1800s, and very early in the Meiji era, Japan itself laid a national network of cables to connect its possessions, not only the Ryukyu Island chain, but also Taiwan. I had the pleasure of visiting Ishigaki Island last year with Nakayama Sensei, and we were able to find the original cable landing site, which you'll see in the top right corner, the photograph we took when we were there. And this is a famous site because of what happened during the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. If you remember, the Russians had dispatched the Baltic Sea Fleet to relieve besieged Port Arthur. The Japanese knew, the Navy and military knew they were coming, they just didn't know when they would show up or where. And the story goes that they were sighted off Miyako Island. The problem was the cable didn't make a landing at Miyako Island. So 5 very brave fishermen rowed overnight, 100 kilometers, traversed the entire island of Ishigaki. It took them 5 hours, finally made it to the cable landing station, and they radioed that the Baltic Sea Fleet had been located. Sadly for them, the same news had been cabled 1 hour earlier by a Japanese merchant ship near the Strait of Tsushima, and of course the rest is history. But back then, we had national cable networks. There was a Japanese cable network. There was a German cable network. There was a British cable network. That's no longer the case. But at the time, at the beginning of World War I, the British found very quickly that they could not only cut the German cables, but also tap them for intelligence. And one of the most famous pieces of intelligence from tapping those cables was this so-called Zimmermann telegram, which was intercepted by London and then sent to Washington, informing them that Germany had asked Mexico to invade the United States, and if successful, they would get the return of formerly Mexican territories to include the state of Texas, the state of Arizona, et cetera. And it was one of the things that led the United States to enter the war. Things are a little different today. We've got a lot more cables and a lot more interconnectivity. There's a lot of resilience already built into the network, and there's no such thing as a national network anymore. But as geopolitical tensions rise around the world, I've outlined 3 basic levels of cable protection that are available to states and groups of states. The first is to build a walled-off network again, essentially a national network. Russia's talked about this. I doubt very much that they would put this into practice, but this really seems impractical in today's world. Given what I said, that the cables themselves aren't that valuable. It's the data that goes across them. Walling off your network to only your traffic not only makes them more vulnerable to sabotage at the end of the day, because you're the only one that's going to get hurt when they're cut, but also it's costly and undermines connectivity. Building resilience is already done to a large degree by the private industry that's largely been responsible for cables over the past 100 and 120 years. It's the best option still available, but vulnerable to geopolitical tensions. And then finally, the idea would be to establish a normative network, kind of like save the whales or don't use nuclear, chemical, biological weapons in warfare. Great idea, hard to build consensus, especially in a rivalrous world. And of course, it's very difficult to enforce during conflict when all bets are off. So this led us at GIF Japan to come up with some research questions about the state of cables and cable security. They were 3. Where and under what condition can states prioritize cable security? We can't secure all cables, so which ones are more important than others? Which cables, therefore, are more likely to be attacked or sabotaged, and by whom? Right, capabilities, intent, and then how do patterns of threat evolve across different levels of geopolitical tension, from peacetime to low tension to high tension to wartime. I'll turn it over to my colleague Matsuo-san now for his presentation on methods and methodology.
So I'd like to explain the methodology we employ to approach the aforementioned research questions. So our ongoing research project mainly consists of 2 parts, the questionnaire survey and an interview survey. So as a first step, we conducted the questionnaire survey to try to quantify the risk perception of the worldwide experts regarding undersea infrastructure. So in this survey, 3 specific undersea cables were chosen as model cases. Unity EAC Pacific cable between Chikura, Japan and the United States, an Asia-American gateway cable between Guam and Hawaii, and TGN Tata Indicom cable between East India and Singapore. So these 3 were chosen because they represent different geographical situation and security context within Indo-Pacific regions. We also base our research survey questions on 2 key assumptions. First, the likelihood of sabotage may be dependent on the ocean zone, including high seas, exclusive economic zone, EEZs, and territorial seas and landing points. And secondly, the threats to an undersea cable varies depending on the level of tensions in international relations from peacetime to wartime. So based on these 2 assumptions, we have developed a matrix table with these 2 factors, and we requested an experts to fill in the table with the likelihood of sabotage from the option of high, medium, and low. So the the photo image on the left side is the capture shot of example of one of the survey questions with sample choices, and a table on the right side is the definition of the risk perception. So we rolled out this questionnaire survey to 29 experts worldwide who specializes in undersea infrastructure or international military affairs. And we have received 17 responses from those who are affiliated with university, research institutions, and private sector companies. So I'm now showing the findings through the survey results. So to make it easier to compare the results between the 2 factors or between cables, we have created a heat maps by giving the score to every response. So as you see, the darker red color implies undersea cable face higher risks. So while the size of sample may be not very large enough to statistically prove our findings, but this result led us to think that the experts' risk perception might share the interesting characteristics as follows. So as one, as regional tension rise, the risk of sabotage also increases. And certain landing points, such as Chikura or Guam, seems more vulnerable than another landing points of the same cable. And this pattern actually was seen across all levels of tension and suggests there is some factors making some certain landing points more vulnerable than others. And three, vulnerability of cables varied by maritime zone. So for example, experts assess the Tata cable is relatively more vulnerable in high seas, whereas other two Pacific cables face higher risks in EEZs or its territorial seas. And finally, Tata cable was perceived as lower risk than other two cables across all levels of tension. So in order to validate these findings, we also have done the qualitative interviews to some of the experts. And as of now, our team has conducted the semi-structured interview with 6 experts. So we asked the question such as what factors make certain landing station more vulnerable compared to others. And we try to explore the possible reasoning and that explains the aforementioned the trends or patterns of the risk perception. So next, Dr. Cannon will continue to share the comprehensive findings and implication from our research and conclude our presentation with his policy recommendations.
Thank you very much, Matsuo-san. That was great. So what we've done now is we're compiling these results and we're putting them into a manuscript we'll submit to a journal as well as some policy pieces. And so what I'm going to present to finalize this presentation are a couple of policy prescriptions we're coming up with. It's early days yet. Like any research project, the answer really is more research is needed. But the first thing is, as Matsuo-san pointed out, geographic proximity. Geography matters, big surprise, okay? So vulnerability has something to do with proximity. This is why we're seeing, on the one hand, Chikura landing station or Guam rated higher in terms of likelihood of sabotage, particularly as tensions go up, but that's across all levels of tensions. So really, the idea would be to strengthen surveillance at vulnerable landing stations, deploy real-time monitoring, which Ikeuchi-sensei already mentioned, and then also clarify institutional, legal, regulatory responsibilities for cable protection. We're finding a lot of countries actually don't have this database, if you will, in their national capitals. There's such a mix of private and public here. And so in a country like Japan that has numerous landing sites and lots of different cables, it's extremely important to understand where those vulnerabilities are because you can't protect everything all at once. Okay, but there's a second part to this. It moves on from geographic proximity, and that's the data transmission we talked about earlier. Risk often depends on data sensitivity. So intelligence, military communications, no surprise. We think that was one of the reasons, and certainly the experts said this, that Guam rates a little bit higher. That cable connection between Guam and Hawaii would likely have a lot of US military traffic on it. Okay, but then there's a flip side of this. The Tate TGN cable that connects Singapore with Chennai was rated lower, but that's not just simply because of geography, right? Yes, the tensions are higher in the Western Pacific right now than they are in the Bay of Bengal, but that could change. But industry folks pointed out to us that this is a tier 1 cable. It carries a huge amount of data to multiple countries. That's the case with most cables. But in this, let's say that cable was sabotaged. You're not only going to damage, say, an adversary like India, if you're China, but you're going to also damage connectivity of 16 or 17 other countries, some of whom might be somewhat friendly to you. So again, you've got to map and prioritize cables based on data sensitivity as well. The third point, risks and transitional periods. Higher sabotage vulnerability is going to occur during ambiguous gray zone periods in between low tension to high tension, for examples. So developing some type of early warning and rapid response capabilities. Again, cable repair ships are very scarce. And so this is something that the Quad has talked about pooling resources towards, and it's a question of whether there has actually been action taken towards that. And the fourth would be to adopt what's been termed a regional seas approach. These are not my own words. This comes from previous research on cables, but this would allow neighboring states, states connected by cables, to pool resources to monitor cable corridors and respond faster to sabotage and sabotage threats. This could be regional seas like the Bay of Bengal or the Sea of Japan, or we can create new regional seas for cables themselves. In this case, I'm thinking, let's say Japan, Guam to Philippines, Philippines, Taiwan, back to Japan. That could be a regional cable sea, for example. So that's something to also think about. Look, in conclusion, yes, cables appear to be increasingly vulnerable to sabotage. Malicious sabotage is what we're talking about rather than accidental. And that is likely only going to increase as geopolitical rivalry increases as well. However, the list of cable sabotage is still quite limited. So there is a notion here that we're all benefiting from this interconnected world, and it's a question of how far we want to wall ourselves off from rivals in this case. But I really think that states getting their own house in order in terms of legal and regulatory capabilities, as well as who manages cables, is really critical here. And then and only then do you adopt that regional seas approach with your neighboring states. And then finally, there's a lot of work being done, much of it in the classified world in terms of underwater surveillance. That needs to come to the fore quite quickly, as well as encryption for data and the quantum that's going to make that even more effective. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate this. Thank you again, Ikeuchi Sensei, for hosting us.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Brendon and Matsuo-san, for this very cutting-edge ongoing research. And we are very happy to ride on this preliminary research results and develop together. So we have three more speakers. So okay, we're almost on time. So and after the presentations, and we have discussion all together. So first, expert presentation comes from Dr. Dattesh Parulekar, an assistant professor of Goa University. So Dr. Dattesh, please.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. Professor Ikeuchi, and thank you very much to the GIF Research Foundation for incorporating me into this particular session this afternoon. It's a pleasure to join my distinguished colleagues on the panel and off the panel. I bring to you a very interesting perspective, and which is to try and shed more light on India's strategic understanding of the maritime Indo-Pacific. And in that, I'm basically talking about this because my own understanding over the last decade has been that while India has grown a very discernible consciousness of its maritime domain across the Indo-Pacific expanse, the doctrine that it enunciated in 2015, which goes by the acronym of SAGAR, which is Security and Growth for All in the Region, has not quite registered or landed in the Indo-Pacific the way in which it ought to have been. And recently, on a visit to Mauritius, the Prime Minister of India has rechristened SAGAR 10 years on. It was enunciated in March 2015. So in March 2025, it got rechristened into Mahasagar. So I felt, why not talk a little bit about this so that there is a better understanding? The first thing is India is no stranger to the Indo-Pacific. In fact, our empires have had a very beneficent and benign footprint across, going not just into what we understand as conventional Southeast Asia, but all the way even into the Philippines, where relics have been found of Indian empires having been there. In fact, important ports which dot India's coastline have been key nodes along prominent maritime routes. So India's consciousness about its maritime domain in civilizational terms has always been there. But the modern Indian state for the last 75 odd years reflected a kind of sea blindness. And therefore, we, in a sense, abdicated what should have been a very favorable maritime geography for ourselves. We did not have a maritime doctrine till the 21st century. The Maritime Security Strategy of 2004, which was updated in 2009, was a very anodyne and a very feeble kind of an experiment because it did not go far enough. And we never had a national security strategy or a foreign policy doctrine that ever outlined India's core tenets in strategic terms. Come 2014, Prime Minister Modi comes to office and he leads a government and party that has got two underpinnings to its maritime understanding. One is philosophically. It goes back to India's civilizational greatness and how India has been a seafaring nation. And it very congruently blends that with the strategic dimensions of how work in the maritime domain will enhance India's national power. So the maritime footprint of India is not just an outcome of its civilizational consciousness, but it's also there to leverage national power going forward. And India has a very, benign maritime geography, 7,600-kilometer coastline, more than 1,300 island features. These are not only geopolitically fraught, but they are geopolitically and geoeconomically an opportunity as well. But India does not claim the Indian Ocean to be itself. It's not India's ocean. India visualizes primacy and agency, but not ownership of the oceans. And that's very important because we know how a certain country, looks at things very differently. To Asia-Pacific entities, the Indian Ocean may just be another sea, but it is a fact that for India, it's its only ocean. And therefore, India talks of the Indo-Pacific, but primarily India looks to be the primary driver in the Indian Ocean region. And there's reason for this. 50% of India's export GDP moves east, but 20% of its export actually is routed through the Red Sea. So in that sense, India's equities lie to its east and to its west, and truly, therefore, has a wingspan across the Indo-Pacific that maybe other countries don't. India's maritime doctrine came about in 2015 in a new avatar, but it was only in 2020 that they talked about ensuring secure seas. And this word is important. It's not security of the seas, but secure seas. And in 2021, they came with the Maritime India Vision for 2030. So quickly looking at the buildup since the enunciation of Sagar in 2015, Sagar was enunciated in Mauritius in March 2015. India basically in its maritime doctrine talked about being a net provider of security and not a net security provider. And I'll be happy to explain that later on. In 2016, they revived the BIMSTEC, which was again very important organization to India's east, which was floundering since 1997. They came to the BRICS meeting and they were then revived subsequently. In 2018, India added to the free and open Indo-Pacific construct the I, which was to make it the FOIIP, which is the free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific, when the Prime Minister spoke at Shangri-La and gave the keynote, where he said for India, it's about non-exclusion, non-antagonism, and non-threatening concepts. It's more about being inclusive and not being exclusive. In 2018, the India-Africa Maritime Summit was important because now we're looking at Eastern African littorals, not just in terms of a continent or a region, but in terms of its maritime domain. In 2019, the IPOI, which I will talk a little later, which is a higher order initiative that India launched. In 2021, as I said, the Maritime India Vision, and in 2023, expanding the Maritime Compact with ASEAN and the Quad. So you can see the build-up there. Of course, when India looks at the Indo-Pacific, for India, the Pacific vector is an over-deterred vector because the trust is a huge issue of deficit here. In contrast, the IOR is where the power is more fluid and therefore there's less hard security and more loose security wiring. So India wants securitization of seas over security on the seas. India endeavors for salience in the IOR and is basically looking at complementarities with like-minded states in the Pacific vector. As I said, New Delhi comprehends net security provider, net provider of security, and advocates prioritizing the second. And what that means is India sees itself proudly as a first responder, and we've done a lot of that in terms of HADR. We see ourselves as a net developmental partner in the maritime domain and also a preferred security partner. So when India looks effectively at its maritime appreciation of the Indo-Pacific, it has the 3 Cs, the 3 Ds, the 5 Ss, and the 4 Ps. in the framework of which it tries to basically build its doctrine. And all of that flows out of it. So the 3 C's are connectivity, which India sees as multidimensional, but multi-stakeholder collaboration and consensus. So you're not building exclusive networks. In terms of commerce, yes, the rules-based international order, but securing what's at sea, what's on the seas, but also what's subsea and what's below. So India wants to look at all of those and focus on that. And culture, because diaspora, communities, and ensuring responsible and harmonious actions is extremely important. The 3 Ds is democracy, and India has done that. When India talked about Sagar, the Prime Minister excluded the Maldives from his visits to send a message to the Maldivian government at that time, which was not necessarily behaving in a democratic manner. You look at demography. India doesn't just talk about the big states, but actually focuses on the SIDS, the small island developing states. And it's Prime Minister Modi who said, when he went to the Pacific Forum in Fiji, when he said that you are not small island states, you are large ocean states. It's just a way of looking at things. You have big EEZs, which are strategic areas of contestation, and they obviously need to be made more benign. And there is, of course, the need for demand. And India believes that actions in the maritime domain have to be need-based and not coercive imposition. The 5 S's, dialogue, and India has been doing this with more than 35 countries now. Cooperation in the maritime domain, which goes by the acronym of SAYOG. Suraksha, where India believes in common security and collaborative security. Frameworks for shared prosperity, and of course, emphasizing civilizational traditions. And the 4 Ps being effectively practices. So India focuses a lot on what is the instrumentality that is at play, the processes and networks that need to be kept trustworthy and full of integrity. It has to be people-centric, and it has to be people-oriented, and ultimately it has to be for the planet, so it has to be sustainable. So that's how Sagar came about. It talks about security and growth for all in the region. These are 2 concepts which are very important for any and every country. I call them secular impulses of every country. And there are 5 prongs to Sagar: maritime security, sustainable blue economy, capacitation, disaster risk reduction, and of course, connectivity and maritime cooperation. Now, interestingly, Sagar from the very beginning was convergent and collaborative, and it kind of aligned itself with 2 key concepts: the global maritime fulcrum that President Jokowi brought out, and of course the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, thereby showing that it plays into teamwork. Although India basically keeps an ambivalence over Sagar, it is more IOR than the Indo-Pacific in terms of how it looks at it. It's got the inclusivity built into it with the FOIIP, and it looks effectively at economic security, strategic capacitation, and disaster resilience. India looks at maritime diplomacy via interoperability exercises, and they do as many as 50 exercises over 35 countries. And I'm adding the recent, the African mission with 9 countries that they did earlier this year. This is interesting because it's often said that India doesn't do higher order maritime ideation, but I think the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative is very important. We outlined this in 2019 at the East Asia Summit in Bangkok, and it's basically voluntary. It has 7 workflows. And what's interesting is India is building these partnerships through minilaterals, effective minilaterals, you can see, across all these 7 pillars. So maritime security is India-UK joint initiative with 3rd countries. Maritime ecology brings in Australia and Thailand. You have France and Indonesia on resources. You have the India-Germany green partnership and capacity. You have India, Japan, and US in terms of maritime transport. India, Singapore, Italy, India, Bangladesh. So India's initiatives bring in countries in its immediate neighborhood, ASEAN countries, which are so critical and central, but also brings in European countries into maintaining a safe place. India's IPOI also blends with other initiatives, like the one with France on the International Solar Alliance, the CDRI with the US, the IRIS with UK, the Mineral Security Partnership with Australia, and the EU's GGI. So it's really an initiative that looks to build partnerships, look to build coalitions, to be able to create a certain community, as I would like to say. India has a key role in rekindling the Quad. And from the very outset, India kept its focus on ensuring that the Quad is not about containment of China, even if the end goal is that. It's about counteracting China. And there are 2 very different understandings of this. If you're counteracting China, you obviously want to bring larger partnerships into play so that China is kept honest. And that can only happen when you securitize the non-traditional security threats. What happens through China is here's a sovereign actor that's very effectively looking to coerce you by using non-traditional security threats. You need to deal with those. You need collaborative regionalism and coordinated multilateralism to go with strengthened bilateralism. So if you see India's maritime approach, it's rooted in strong bilateral relations, which becomes the building blocks then for effective regionalism through minilaterals and plurilaterals, building effectively into coordinated multilateralism. If you look at the Quad initiative last year, India had a big role to play in shaping those, the future of ports. The conference is happening on 8th and 9th in Mumbai. The deep sea cable connectivity and resilience initiative that India is very much part of. And of course, the Sea Ship Observer mission that India has talked about. So India wants to keep the Quad focus on not containment, but human-centric governance and digitalization. The Quad's strength lies in being a robust, competitive alternative to China and not necessarily a reductionist bulwark to China. The Quad has to become the Quad Plus if it has to gain traction. And for that, it has to bridge the maritime axes of the global north and the global south. And India is somebody who is a part of the global north, institutions like the G7, etc. We're also very much one of the proponents of the global south. So what are my concluding remarks? The first really is that you need to broaden and refine the understanding of maritime security. And that's why India's approach through Sagar and Mahasagar is make the maritime approach less ideologically geopolitical, but more economically geopolitical. And I think this is where India and Japan as two countries can leverage their partnership, because we are more about the geoeconomics of geopolitics and less about the ideological nature of geopolitics, which will obviously come in when the United States is very much front and center. The maritime collectivization in favor of ensuring comprehensive and sustainable security, and therefore hard security, but more soft security, and emphasis on critical infrastructure, cyber maritime threats, etc. Maritime unilateralism is to be encouraged towards effective and curated partnerships. You need sovereign pluralization of maritime spaces. India favors more players in the Indian Ocean than being less players. So India encourages every player to be part of it. The most recent example is how India and the UAE have decided to build the energy terminal in Sri Lanka. So it just shows you that India is very willing to be with like-minded partners in the Indian Ocean, because it's about being non-antagonistic, non-threatening, and non-exclusionary of anyone else. India looks at strategic coalitions within maritime spaces on the rise. And I want to just point this out here. Many people may have not quite registered, but if you look at the way in which the BRICS is expanding, at least for now, the BRICS has the potential to also become a maritime player. Of the 10 countries that are now members of BRICS, with Indonesia joining on the 1st of Jan, if you leave out Ethiopia, every other country which is a member of BRICS is a maritime country in some way or the other. And so we can't forget the fact that at some point in time, the BRICS might also develop a maritime nest, which will then put the BRICS and the Quad somewhere on a kind of collision course. And probably with India being part of both the BRICS and the Quad, and also having the I2U2, which has its own maritime nest, India becomes that linchpin which can basically manage all these three in the competitive axis between them. The global south is a key swath that should not be left out. The strategic autonomy, the strategic capacitation, and the participation of the global south in maritime governance remains a priority. Lastly, as I sign off, Sagar to Mahasagar in the last 10 years and going forward is for sustainable maritime processes, practices, peoples, and spaces as far as India is concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dattesh, for your very vocal, fluent presentation of Indian diplomacy, security policy. As the ancient Buddhism god, India has many hands to shake. So it's a very multilateral, extremely multilateral policy for us to fully S2 understand. So anyway, so next speaker, also originally from India, our friends, Dr. Jagannath Panda, head of Stockholm Center for South Asian and Indo-Pacific Affairs, ISDP, Institute of Security and Development Policy, Sweden. So Dr. Jagannath Panda, please.
Thank you, Satoshi Sensei. A great pleasure to be here, and also special thanks to my good friend, Professor Brendon Cannon. Great to be here, and thanks for this panel, excellent panel. And I think we are covering a range of issues here. But I am primarily going to cover about the Global South, how Global South could be connected or could be a force, driving force behind the security scenario in the maritime sector that we are talking about. Now, this is a very interesting thing because, you know, we, as a scholar, we could keep on debating about Global South and we could agree and disagree. But on the agreement part, one thing is very clear, that the concept does exist, something like Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific might have different interpretations of different countries, but the conception of Indo-Pacific is here to stay. Similarly, the concept of Global South also becoming a permanent entity, even though there are definitional non-clarities there, and different countries, scholars, academicians, they would like to define the concept of Global South differently. To me, Global South is a concept very much similar with Indo-Pacific as a spatial concept. It not necessarily only covers countries from the southern sphere or from the developing world or from the emerging economy. It covers countries even from the global north or from the west, those who have not really been factored primarily within the prism, from the prism of Global South. There are countries in the west also who could be connected with it. And therefore, if we are really talking about the future global maritime security, particularly in the context of Indo-Pacific, we also need to connect with those countries. While saying that, I think what is it is important to keep it in mind that we know for a fact that probably the concept of Global South is not a new one. It does existed in 50s, 60s, but probably not in the same formulations like the concept is being called today as Global South. I could read out the speech during the ASEAN Relations Conference, during the Bandung Conference. Similar wording, similar phraseologies has been used to talk about a kind of analogy among the developing and emerging economies. So therefore, this is not necessarily a new concept. And since then, number of academicians, they have written here and there, and also particularly from the, if we see the, the arguments which is coming from the Chinese scholars, they have been talking about Global South for some time. Indian scholars, Indian academicians, they have been talking about Global South for some time. In fact, scholars from some parts of Africa, they have been talking about. But I think this contest is welcome. The different interpretation is welcome because it makes the concept Global South as a permanent entity. But what is also making this concept very interesting is the strategic relevance of this concept. As I mentioned, this concept should not be and is not entirely at this moment confined to the emerging world or the emerging economies or the developing world. It is very much linked with countries who are beyond the southern hemisphere, countries which also very closely associated what we used to call it at one point probably West. Probably today after Trump has arrived in the power, during his second tenure, probably the West is going through its rough phase, and probably many scholars will be tempted to argue, including me, probably there is nothing called West per se, because US is getting divided from Europe. Europe is having its own security thinking and future. So in that context, probably a lot of issues are going to be debated. But what is making really something very significant is that Global South as a concept is rising. And it is also rising partly because it is a concept which is only solidifying and strengthening the notion of multipolar world. We know that when we're talking about multipolarism, it is much more structural. But when we are talking about multipolarity, it is much more substructural. But the connect between multipolarism and multipolarity is something that the Global South actually today lives with. All of these Global South countries, we might include them, some of them we might include, some of them we might exclude, but they are an interesting case how they are a part of both the developing world, multipolar world, and they are also at the same time a part of the emerging economies. And here I'm also giving the essence background, what actually is going to be the binding factor behind the global south and the maritime sector. One of the primary pressure point for the global south countries, let's say essentially when we are talking about global south countries, we are calling from emerging economies, developing world, or countries from African and Asian continent. One of their core complaining point to the West or to the developed world has been that the developed world or the big economies or the so-called classical institutions, what we call Bretton Woods institutions, has not really been fair to them, be it IMF, WTO, World Bank. Today, I think all of these newly arrived countries who are emerging and trying to make a voice, their aim is to fight against what it is called as unilateralism, what it is called as excessive protectionism. And therefore, global south countries are becoming a universal, integral part of the multipolar world structure. Therefore, revisionism resistance, be it in the maritime sector or in the non-maritime sector. When we are talking about non-maritime sector, we are essentially talking about the global multilateral platforms, institutions, where the global south countries would like to have much stronger voice. They would like to have much more, independent voice to raise their, voting percentage to participation stake. And therefore, building a comprehensive security plan to resist those revisionism, to bring out those radical revisionism against authoritarian powers. And today probably I'll be happy to include United States of America as an authoritarian power, the way Donald Trump is acting. So to act against all of these authoritarian powers and also against the unilateral mode of actions is one of the core points. So therefore, revisionism resistance is going to be an integral part of global south as well as maritime sector. Because in the maritime sector, if we take about the case of Japan, India, ASEAN countries, those who are the claimant countries in the South China Sea dispute, one of their main country, cooperating point is how to actually resistance the revisionism that the Chinese are trying to bring to the regions, and they are changing the thing. Now, if you see this map, I keep on showing this map in different platforms because this is very key. And from the Chinese side, how they have capitalized on the global south terminology. Belt and Road Initiative is not just a Silk Road Economic Belt and Maritime Silk Road projects. It is more than that. If you see and deconstruct each of these Belt and Road initiatives, and there are 6 corridors are there. If we study about each of these corridors, in each of these corridors, the Chinese have involved so many global south countries. That is something which we need to really take into account. And each of these global south countries are critical, not only for the China's land planning in the Eurasian regions, but on the maritime sectors. And therefore, global south countries are becoming a part of divided politics that we are going to enter. If you see this map also talks about the China's maritime Silk Road from a future point of view. Last 20 years, 25 years example, if you see, the Chinese have actually gone ahead in terms of establishing more than 25, 30 stationing points all over the Indian Ocean. And some of these countries are actually part of the global south terminologies. So when we are talking about global 30, global 35, global 40, global 50 scenarios, global south countries are going to be an integral part of the maritime security, and therefore we need to involve them at some point or another. Interestingly, this is relevant for Japan, this is relevant for India, and relevant for many other countries. This map I prepared almost 6-7 years back, and this is not an official map, but this map has been used for the official purposes. When I was working in Delhi in the previous institute, this map has been used as the track 1.5 level dialogue when the late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was there. He proposed about Asia-Africa Growth Corridor with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and it was announced. If you see this map actually talks about how the visionary leader like late Abe Shinzo, he talked about involving some of the global south countries or developing economies from the regions in the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. And Asia-Africa Growth Corridor is a classic corridor plan which actually talks about global south connect in the maritime domain. because it involves African countries, it involves Asian countries, particularly from Southeast Asia, and that actually, this is what we need to really talk about. Of course, Asia-Africa Growth Corridor has not really been going forward because of a number of issues, because of funding problems, because of execution plan, lack of political will, many other issues, but this has been a key issue. But again, going forward, I think we need to think about how the global South countries should be a factor, not only with India and Japan, but in the larger Indo-Pacific domain involving in the maritime security. So therefore, we need to involve them when we are talking about maritime territorial integrity. We need to involve them. When we are talking about a sensitive issue like Taiwan, we also need to establish this collaboration with the global South countries. Unless we have their support, we cannot create a global platform in favor of Taiwan, because Taiwan's contingency is Japan's contingency. Taiwan's contingency is actually contingency for the Bay of Bengal and India. So there are a lot of interlinkages issues we need to really talk about. And therefore, we need to really talk about how the global South countries could be a pillar in times to come in the maritime sectors, in the Indo-Pacific, and also in strengthening the rules-based order. I'll stop here and probably invite your comments. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Jagannath. So next, last but not least, the speaker is Dr. Yee-Kuang Heng, Head of Security Studies Unit of Institute for Future Initiative, IFI, at the University of Tokyo, and also Professor of Graduate School of Public Policy, GRASP. So we have already presentations about India's and the Indian Ocean in a strategic theater. So how Japan is now involved in this theater is a crucial question. So Dr. Heng, please.
Thank you very much, Ikeuchi Sensei, for hosting us, and also thanks to Nakayama Sensei, also Sakamoto-san, for all the hard work with logistics for this workshop. So Brendon asked me to share some of our work on Japan's joint naval exercises with you today. So let me begin by showing you this map of major exercises that Japan has conducted in the Indo-Pacific, and this is taken from the Ministry of Defense website. So just a quick glance, I don't need to go into detail, but you'll see that there's lots of activity going on, right, with those exercises. And this is somehow not surprising, because the importance of exercises is highlighted in Japan's most recent National Defense Strategy 2022. So the very first defense priority for Japan is to, quote, shape a security environment that does not tolerate unilateral challenge to the status quo by force. So how does Japan intend to achieve this defense objective, uppermost priority? The document goes on to explain that in order to do so, it is necessary to improve, reinforce training and exercises with not only the US as Japan's #1 ally, but also increasingly with like-minded partners as well. So if you read the document, you will find this phrase being repeatedly deployed. Japan will exercise and train with the US plus like-minded partners. So this raises several research questions for Brendon, myself, and our dear colleague Ash, who cannot join us today. So there's lots of exercises nowadays that self-defense force is engaged in. However, there does not seem to be a systematic evaluation that exists of these exercises so far. So there's no evaluation of the purposes, the benefits, the efficacy, at least in the public domain that we know of, but maybe Kitagawa-san might tell us something else later on. And the other question that we had was also, how can these joint naval exercises be an instrument for Japan to shape its preferred vision of regional order? We all know about the FOIP, the Free and Open Indo-Pacific vision. So what is the role of Japan's naval exercises in trying to realize this vision of FOIP? So from an academic perspective, there's lots of ongoing work on the role of shaping logics, right? How military power can be deployed to shape security environments. And this is the work that I've taken from scholars like Wolfe. And he suggests 4 different types of shaping logics. And I don't have time to go into all these details here, but just to quickly run through them. Attraction, of course, to draw in partners, socialization, to disseminate preferred types of behavior norms that you want to see. Delegation, meaning you want to help your partners cope with their security challenges, so capacity building, for example. And also, of course, assurance, right, to help to assuage anxiety, right, of a partners, especially if they're faced with security challenges in our region, of which there are a lot. So we looked at these research questions, and together with Brendon and also our dear friend Ash Rossiter, we were lucky to publish some of these works in a recent review, in the recent Pacific Review, just published earlier this year. So I'll share some of the key highlights of this paper. It's 10,000 words, so I don't have time to go into all of that. So what we tried to do in this paper was firstly try to outline certain indicators of purpose, right? So what should we look for, right, when we analyze these exercises? What tells us about the importance or significance of these exercises? So we've got a list here. Firstly, we need to, of course, identify who is involved, right? Who are the participants? And then secondly, what is the exercise content? What exactly are the scenarios being practiced? What are the assets that were deployed? And also location. I think that can also tell us something about the significance of where the exercise is held. We also wanted to look at regularity. So when are these exercises conducted? How frequent are they? Are they regularized? Are they institutionalized? Are they becoming more routine? And above all, we also wanted to look at the reasons why, right? These exercises were conducted in the first place. So how were they explained, right? How were they framed? And what were the political justifications put forward, at least in the official domain? So we look at 2 cases in our paper. The first case is exercise Malabar. And this is an exercise that first started with a bilateral passage exercise between India and the US in 1992. But this bilateral exercise has now expanded and grown in scope so that it now includes regular participants drawn from Australia, US, India, and Japan. The location also tells us something about the scope. Initially focused on the Indian Ocean, the location now includes the Western Pacific and expanded into the South Pacific in 2023 for the first time. In terms of the benefits, quite a lot of people that we speak to told us that this was a very strong political exercise. So there's a very strong political element behind it, right? So there's very clear geopolitical significance that's attached to the Malabar exercise. So if you look at how Japan's Ministry of Defense explained the benefit of Malabar, it is suggested that, quote, Malabar helps to crystallize the shared vision of the free and open Indo-Pacific. So there's a strong geopolitical significance there in terms of trying to shape your desired regional order. And looking at the partners, there are, of course, the key Quad partners involved, as I mentioned. However, important to note that Malabar is not formally a Quad exercise at the same time. So that's a separate issue we can discuss. Looking at the content, there's high-end content involved. So anti-submarine warfare, anti-air, replenishment at sea, surface gunnery, even special forces. So these are relatively high-end complex scenarios. And if you look at the assets that Japan has deployed to Malabar, for example, in 2021, it also tells us a lot about the significance that Japan, attaches to the exercise. So a special boarding unit deployed, JS Kaga, a flat top helicopter carrier, Murasame, Shiranui, maritime patrol aircraft, submarines as well, right? So it tells us a lot about, what Japan thinks about this exercise. So several interviewers that we spoke to tell us that, this exercise, at least in terms of the content and the assets deployed, passes the so-called smell test, right? So it looks like a serious exercise. So let me turn to the second exercise that we looked at, which is the Rim PAC exercise, Rim of the Pacific exercise. So this has been conducted almost every year since 1971, and 2024 was the 29th Rim PAC, so very long-standing exercise. Location-wise, usually held around the Hawaiian Islands. Participants also tells us something. It's described as the world's largest international maritime exercise, according to the US Pacific Fleet. So last year, 29 countries, surface vessels, submarines, aircraft, land forces even, total 25,000 personnel. So very large scale multilateral exercise. So Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force has participated in RIMPAC since 1980. So again, very long-standing exercise. And 2024 was the 23rd time that Japan had participated. So if you look at the official explanations, according to the press release issued by Maritime Staff Office, there are several aims here. Firstly, to improve tactical capabilities, enhance mutual understanding, strengthen relationship with partners, and also crucially hints at the geopolitical significance in terms of realizing the free and open Indo-Pacific again, right? Looking at the content, there is a focus on anti-submarine warfare in 2024, live fires of missile exercises, also humanitarian HADR training. So I'll just give one example here of what went on in RIMPAC 2024. There was a SINK-X, which is a live fire exercise to sink a decommissioned ship, in this case, a large US assault ship, the USS Tarawa, in 2024. So what happens here is we have actually ground self-defense force personnel deployed to fire Type 12 surface-to-ship missiles. So if you look at the partners, it tells us a lot about the value added for Japan. And it is described as, quote, a valuable opportunity to coordinate and collaborate with the US military, right? So the Type 12 surface-to-ship missiles are coordinated with the US Army's HIMARS systems. We all hear about HIMARS nowadays. So there's a very strong operational focus here, at least in terms of the gain for Japan. So I'll two more slides and then I'll conclude. So what about some exercise scenarios that could be focused on protecting undersea cables? As Brendon mentioned earlier, Taiwan conducted some exercises recently on how to patrol and protect undersea cables. There might be the use of autonomous, uncrewed underwater drones to conduct surveillance, deep water cable repair capabilities. Those are very high-end niche capabilities as well. The Quad partnership, which mentioned earlier, so far doesn't seem to quite have that focus on the exercises, right? So that might be another platform. And we all know that just this year, NATO has launched its multi-domain activity, Baltic Sentry, which is specifically focused on protecting undersea cables. So there's lots of potential scenarios that we can look at in terms of exercises to protect undersea cables. And finally, just a quick note that Japan's Self-Defense Force is going to get more busy with more exercises as we see increasing European deployments to the Indo-Pacific. So we had the UK Carrier Strike Group in 2021, with a Netherlands frigate escort. And this year, CSG-25 is once again coming to Japan, and with a Norwegian frigate and supply ship. UK Royal Navy has also 2 forward deployed offshore patrol vessels in the Indo-Pacific, which regularly comes to Japan as well. France has also deployed its own carrier strike group, the mission Clemenceau, this year. Unfortunately, the carrier Charles de Gaulle was not able to come to Japan for a port call. But there were regular port calls being made by French frigates regularly to Japan. The Italians also sent a carrier strike group last year, and back in 2023 also sent another offshore patrol vessel. The German Navy also conducted its Indo-Pacific deployment last year of a frigate and supply ship, and the Netherlands has also deployed its frigate Prompt in 2024 as well. So we see this growing presence of European naval deployments in our region, and inevitably Maritime Self-Defense Force will be engaged in exercises with our European partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Heng, for deciphering so Japan's multiple maritime training with partners, and compared with our friends Indian, officers, Japanese officers are usually very calm and don't speak about the purposes, meaning, and results. So we need someone from outside to they decipher. But now we move on to the discussion, and first, we have already packed the round table, but please move here. We have another speaker commentator. Maybe he will take. Okay, so maybe okay. So he Dr. Kitagawa, now Professor Kitagawa of Keio University, who is exceptionally vocal Japanese, former officer, a Japan Maritime Self-Defense Forces, and now teaching security studies in Keio University. So we have a it's huge puzzle. But now you please start with your comments.
Ikeuchi Sensei, thank you very much. My name is Keizo Kitagawa from Keio University. And I'm very delighted and thankful for the kind introduction by Ikeuchi Sensei in the beginning. And my background, I was active naval officer until last December. And I became a business, I started my business. Now from April, I'm teaching I'm a professor at the policy management at the Keio University. And my specialty is, well, of course, defense and security and strategic studies, war studies, and military history and the leadership. And I teach undergraduates and graduate students Keio. They are brilliant. And I'm very grateful that I have this opportunity today, and thank you very much for Nakayama Sensei for this giving precious opportunity. So my role as my role is commentator? Yes, analyst, yes. I would like to comment on 4 speakers. Then I would like to add some flavors on all of you. Then I make a question to each one of you. And actually for keynote speaker for Dr. Cannon and Matsuo-san, I have 2 questions. So please, you don't have to get ready. I will make a question in the last. So first start with the speaker was Dr. Cannon Matsuo-san concerning the strategic undercurrent mapping threat to the undersea communication cable across in the Pacific. And I think it's really, you mentioned it's early in stage and the research and share. I think as you know, as you mentioned, 99% of our digital communication is done by by the this underway cable. And it was really, you'd made comprehensive from the history that one of the reasons Japan won the Japan-Russia war was the underwater cable with intelligence or information conveyed to the combined fleet in Chile, Korea. And then the Navy was able to maneuver. So having said that, I was very pleased to hear about the methodology and the findings, which like Matsuo-san especially brought. And I'd like to add that the communication is not only particularly for the communication, but for the business overall, particularly like all the transaction, like I can buy things from France, UK, anywhere, or from the Middle East. And so financially is important. Also, I would say military, lots of military communication is done through these normal cable, because only portion of the satellite's communication can handle all the bulk load of the communication. So I'm very looking, and also, so I'm gonna make a question later on, but I think your research on the key findings and conclusion will help. Everybody is now keen to how to protect or how to allocate the resource of the underwater cable. So I think the point would be 3 points. One is how to protect, and the other is how to product or have the market. Nowadays, I think US and Japan and Germany companies mostly has the laying the capabilities. But as you know, China is growing to make. So is it only done by private sectors or need to be public subsidized and so forth? And also the other is the daily maintenance of the cable to make the business. So that's, I think this research will contribute to the policymakers as well. So secondly, for, can I say, Parulekar, doctor? Yes, you mentioned about Sagar, and as a former naval officer, it's very familiar about Indian navies, and I think you were very grateful to share about how the India looks, and I thought it's very Indian that you may think it's Indian Ocean is Indian, but you say it's for everybody, and I think it's very wonderful. And also, you read, I was going to say about the Quad, that I thought, think about Quad, all the 4 nations are maritime nation, but you mentioned about BRICS. BRICS is also maritime nation already. So I think we are kind of synchronized on that thinking, because I wasn't making that comment, but you did it already about the BRICS, and it was I think very interesting. And so and also the we are able to understand the history of Indian, you said empire, but I'm not sure it's empire now, but maybe to be, but it'll be like strategic understanding and the evolution of thinking. And I was fortunate, it was interesting, and I'll make a question later about how the India bridged your role in the global South. And I think the Dr. Pandas will and you will perhaps share about global South more. Thank you. And third one, Dr. Panda's global South and maritime security. And I was very, I learned about the like philosophy about, and also this is like more concept arising, you said. So it would be, I think it's ongoing discussion. And I will ask about that more later. Thank you very much. And finally, Dr. Heng's Japan's joint naval exercise. I was very pleased that I think you, Dr. Heng, will know the overall scheme of the exercise than active Japanese naval officers, I can guarantee. I was very impressed. And I happened to be, back in 2007, when you mentioned Malabar, I was the international policy desk officer to formulate. It was very, I think the Malabar exercise was remarkable because about our security scheme. Until 2015 was quite difficult until the parliament passed the security-related law scheme. Nowadays, Japan can do the political self-defense in certain cases. And so that makes all the defense force easier to do more advanced exercise, whoever related to keep the peace and stability of this region. Anyhow, you mentioned about I think it was interesting to know from the outside, because it's a bit difficult to measure, because any military service is executor for national policy. So in Japan, there is a national security strategy, and then defense strategy, and midterm defense planning. Then these forces, now we have a joint operational headquarters in Ichigaya. Anyhow, but I think you mentioned about the list of research questions, how you measure. I think it's a well try to be academic, because in the policy it's a bit difficult that JMSF doesn't have this autonomy to do everything. So they have to listen to National Security Secretariat, Joint Staff, whatever. And particularly, it's an all Japan effort, particularly Minister of Foreign Affairs and also the other Navy. So it's a really mixed background, if I may tell you about how the exercise run. But in order to be academic target, I think it's really grateful as a former naval officer to go this way, and I support it. So that's a comment, and I would like to make about my points very briefly about, I think, well, I don't want to do the half job from Ikeuchi Sensei, that Ikeuchi Sensei invited me as your shoes when the doctorate of the Estonia. I was like, your shoes. And I was relieved after my talk for 10 minutes. But today, I had to listen to all of you. And in the afternoon. So in order to get more invite again, I do my opinion again. So in Estonia, the seminar was about underwater cable on the Baltics. And the Ikeuchi Sensei asked me how I relate to East China Sea. And I try to integrate about the theme was underwater superiority is a sea control. So I'd like to add some value to seminar about the word sea power. I think this sea power has 4 aspects. One is the international trade. The second is resource. And third is more operating like military in the conflict. And also fourth is more diplomacy, the influence of the national policy. So I think this is a really good place, the University of Tokyo with the roles, which has interdisciplinary research about some kind of technical and then international relations. So having said that, I think if I speak about that underwater cable in the sea power, I think that's which we must do academically. Now I'm part of the academia. So I have to speak very carefully, because until December, I was a player to do it. But now when I say, it doesn't mean maybe it can influence, but that's besides the point. So about sea power, the sea power, I would say the role of Navy is 3 parts. One is defense, a military role, and also the diplomatic role, and one is police or constabulary role. So in those merging, there's a limit of which Navy can do, So ocean is very comprehensive and international issue. Having said that, in the sea power is 3-dimension, like above water and on the water and underwater. But which underwater is still the area we had to explore. And I will make a question, each of you, on these aspects from the sea power, okay? So start from, I won't make a big difficult question, so please don't worry. So for Team Cannon and Team Matsuo, I have 2 questions. Maybe this will bring to brilliant Matsuo-san. This is rather, I'm very interested in analytical things. So I think how, you don't have to go into detail this time because of limited time, but about the threat that you mentioned on the table, because in the reality, we call as a peacetime and gray zone and like wartime, these in Japanese government terms. So how I would like to, can you elaborate in some way that how did you measure the threat? Because it's very bit difficult, and but as a policy maker will be grateful that if you come up with these simple data, but it's very difficult in situation, and also about ocean is influenced by the natural, the climate thing phenomenon and so forth. So if you can share, how did you make that threat? I'd be grateful. And second question is perhaps to Cannon Sensei about, because your station, well, not station, you teach in the Middle East, in the Gulf. And I thought about it, my experience of deployment to the Middle East. We work with MNF, multinational force, that's headquartered in Bahrain. So I would say in your idea, I'm sure you're not the submerged engineer. I think you do the more, okay, you do the more international relations. So from your experience in like MNF, do you think you can do MNF to the underwater elsewhere, maybe in Indian Ocean or whatever? That's my question 1. And question to the Parulekar, Dr. Parulekar, would be about Global South. Okay. Do you think and I'm not the specialist on that, but is there like a mechanism that's which bound the Global South in terms of this maritime security, or I'm talking about, not like the IMO or like, IONS, Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. Besides that, in this level, what you decide, is there like mechanism, or is India is eager to lead? That's my question to you. And third question to Dr. Panda is about, I'd like to hear about you mentioned about the pillars in the late, you mentioned about Taiwan, the pillar, and how would you connect that Taiwan issues with your talking about the Global South as like more like philosophy or concept? And the fourth, last to the Heng Sensei, would be I would say this theme is about underwater, and you mentioned about the exercise. But if we were to do the exercise, the difficult thing for undersea water cable is not, it's a commercial. And it's, difficult thing about the military or defense service is the escalation ladder. If some force goes to some area, may escalate the tension. So having said that, is there any your idea which not escalating the ladder of the situation, but may have the exercise for this underwater cooperation? Thank you.
So I'll answer the first question. So I'm not sure I completely respond to your question, but so in the first place, this is a really first steps in early stage to try to quantify the threats. And I also find it really difficult to make a definition of the tension levels when like creating the matrix table we showed. Yeah, some of the experts I had interviewed with also questions the accuracy of the definition of threats. So I think the tension, global tension, could be whether like international tension, such as the current economic conflict between the U.S. or China, or it may be like the more regional specific tension. So I think the next step would be to, in order to measure the threats in a more realistic way, we need to like create a more specific scenarios and expect more realistic, like is the case to that measure the threats more accurate in an accurate way.
Thank you. I'm not try to put the pressure on you or anything. I try to be helpful for the further studies. In the defense thinking, we are also thinking about ends, ways, means, and risk. So I would say, if you clarify the end state, the desired end state, that would be like measure what you can do. So for the gap. So with these mathematical one and these non-mathematical one, hope you can merge. Yes. I think I'm looking forward to hear the result.
Thank you very much, Kitagawa-sensei. Nice to see you again, and thanks for the question. Look, all of this is aspirational right now in terms of multinational efforts on cables. The Quad's taken a first step. You're correct that in terms of private cable operators, manufacturers, layers, NEC Japan is one of the top three. Alcatel France is the second, and then Subcom in the United States is the third. HMN Tech or Huawei is a distant fourth. Its break into the market was actually something that was one of the triggers, I think, that alerted both Japan and the United States initially to this threat, if you will, and also the potential for rival cable networks. And so that's part of that, an answer to or clarification. In terms of joint or combined efforts on cables, the Quad's taken the first step, but that is proceeding, my understanding is that's proceeding at very much a unilateral level or at most a bilateral level. So Australia took the lead on that. Published an article earlier in Marine Policy on this, how the Quad's tackling this issue. Again, as I said in my presentation, we need to get our houses in order first prior to actually then being able to do something combined as far as cables is concerned. I think that's a good, worthy end goal. There's a lot of work to be done. And this is a relatively new thing. We weren't talking about undersea cables in this way just even 5 years ago. So it's going very, very quickly. Part of this is a securitization of the topic. It's very clear that's what's happened given the small list of cable sabotage that we can certainly say or almost certainly say is malicious. But nonetheless, we can expect or forecast that this will rise. So in terms of doing this, yes, that's a worthy end goal, but we're not there yet, and we're not even close.
Thank you. The securitization is really the things we have to watch. I understand. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Sensei. I think basically you framed it in terms of two questions. So I'll answer both of them. The first, of course, that you asked at the end, which is there a certain framework within which the Global South can organize and frame its maritime prioritization? But you also asked the question a little earlier about what is it that makes India the potential bridge power, being able to deal with the Global South. So let me begin with that question first. And I want to just inform audiences and illuminate certain aspects. What is the uniqueness of India's ability to be able to be that bridge power? First of all, when India defines its foreign policy goals or its national interest prioritization, it seldom does it in any antagonistic way. So India is never defining themselves as being anti anything. India is always joining frameworks which are pro something. And that's why the focus of India has always been, and I'll give an example. It has normally been held that when in global South countries, when there is a change of dispensation, when governments change, new governments, have a new calculus by which they see things. And invariably, if projects have not been framed by keeping the best principles in mind, those projects will be flipped by incoming governments. Now, take the example of Sri Lanka. Since 2014, the current government of India has been committed to provisioning of public goods to Sri Lanka, not only in terms of its strategic understanding, but even in Tamil areas, in terms of social projects, welfare projects, etc. Sri Lanka is now in its 5th president since 2014, right? And these have come from various political parties, including the chaos that we saw in Sri Lanka for a couple of years. None of the presidents, including the current president, who is an avowed communist and very antithetical to the current government in India in terms of ideology, none of the presidents have ever talked in terms of reversing Indian commission projects in Sri Lanka, because those projects have carried 5 principles that India outlined in 2015 as being the 5 principles for sustainable financing of infrastructure. And India said those 5 principles are: when we commission a project in any country in the global South, we will want to have the broadest possible political consultation in that country, with the government and also with opposition parties, so that it's not seen as a government project to be flipped over. India will look at financial viability with all its seriousness. So we are not going to in any way allow a debt to mount on that country. Thirdly, our projects are going to be ecologically sentient, ecologically conscious, so that there will not be any environmental repercussions. The fourth is they will be stakeholder driven and they will be need based. So as far as possible, there will be a grassroots consultation with communities who at the end of the day are the reference points for them. And fifth really is, to the extent possible, there will be a buy-in of countries who have very similar perspectives in terms of these projects. This has been the basis of our projects across the global South. And we've been asking the Quad and asking other coalitions that if this kind of a principled approach is taken, you will be able to, be a competitor to China and China's, debt-ridden project model. At the same time, you'll be able to serve what the global South wants. And what does the global South want? And basically, it's a bit of, they want their own autonomous strategic autonomy to be built. They, in fact, want their projects to be essentially owned by them and not be driven by someone else. But they also want a better understanding of their maritime domain. We have the National Institute of Oceanography, which is, of course, based in Goa. It so ironically happens it's based in Goa, where I come from. The National Institute of Oceanography has been identified as a knowledge partner of the Commonwealth. The NIO has been conducting hydrographic mapping for a whole host of global South countries, helping them better understand the ocean floor. Now, this is towards building maritime sentience of the global South. So the reason India bridges is because India brings positiveness to the idea of maritime capacitation, maritime diplomacy. And just to borrow what Heng said, I liked his the four concepts that he talked about. India actually does all of that in the global South, which is why India is a bridge power. India brings attraction, which makes it a bridge power. India brings socialization. In fact, socialization is part of India's maritime diplomacy. And that's another aspect. India believes in delegation, which is why India believes in autonomous capacitation. Even our digital public infrastructure in the maritime space is not about selling Indian digital wares to those countries. It's about bringing those wares to those countries, helping them understand them, and helping them implement them so that we are empowering societies. And ultimately, the assurance factor as well. Now, coming to the point that you asked later, the global South, to be very honest, is an amorphous entity. It's a bit like an amoeba. It goes in and out, right? And therefore, there is a huge, as Panda Sensei mentioned, there's a huge diverse understanding of what the global South is. But let me present here, when we talk of the global South, we must not probably make the mistake of thinking the global South is exclusively maritime. If you look at China, for instance, we look at China's BRI in terms of its 6 corridors. and we focus on all of them. But to be honest, I think somewhere down the line, we're missing the wood for the trees when we don't give enough weightage to China's corridors, which are looking to connect land with the maritime domain. I ask a simple question. We all know of Iran as a kind of a pariah. They have been under the cosh in terms of sanctions. They've been isolated. But are they really isolated today? I mean, after what Israel's done, they're partly isolated. But actually, Iran is brought into SCO. Is that isolation? Iran is brought into BRICS. Is that isolation? Iran is offered $400 billion by Xi Jinping in 2016 when he went there for a 25-year deal. Is that isolation? It's actually not isolation. It is appreciation of a country that holds the key in connecting the land and the continental side to the maritime side. So when we understand Global South, the reason there is not a possibility to have a common framework is there are various sub-geographies within the Global South. There are certain critical geographies, there are certain rising geographies, there are certain buttonhole geographies, but all of them have their own intricacies within the maritime domain. Some are mainstay maritime, some are connectivity maritime, some are effectively leveraging the maritime domain. So that's why there is no basic framework as such. But ultimately, any maritime posture has to be based on autonomization and preservation of the democratic character of these maritime states. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think Taiwan question, as we know, is very sensitive. I don't here advocate the fact that we need to mobilize the Global South countries to take a firm position in favor of Taiwan and against China. That's not the idea here. I'm not arguing they should acknowledge Taiwan as a separate entity or as an independent country. No, that's not the idea. The idea is to create a global ethos to demand to maintain status quo. If we maintain the status quo the way it is today, then it is in our favor to build a maritime security in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond the way we want to. So therefore, having a global consensus and taking it into board of the Global South countries are the most prominent one. Because if you see Taiwan's connections, diplomatic connections with some of these countries, so those 14 to 15 countries with whom Taiwan is having diplomatic nexus, they are primarily either they're part of the Global South chain or they are part of the developing world. So we need to have more voices from Global South who could not really challenge China, but also challenge China's plan of action, future plan of action. Because here we are talking about 2030, 35, 40. If China occupies Taiwan, then a lot of maritime dynamics are going to be changing in the regions. So therefore, we need to build a consensus and ethos who could object to China's game plan of occupying Taiwan, but not really taking a firm position of acknowledging Taiwan. I'm not advocating for that. So acknowledging one China policies should be the ethos, but not really allowing China to occupy Taiwan. If we do that, I think that will be a good consensus to build in the Indo-Pacific regions, taking the support from the Global South countries.
Okay, thank you very much, Tagawa-san. As always, good questions for us to think about. I think you're absolutely right, because when we think about designing exercises, we have a desired outcome you want to achieve, but there is also the unintended or unwanted outcome that could emerge as well. As you well know, these exercises tend to also generate action-reaction dynamics. So you often have Chinese or Russian intelligence collection ships shadowing your exercises, maritime patrol aircraft trying to collect all your signals. So that there is that action-reaction dynamic that we couldn't quite capture in our paper, because we wanted to see what is the intended rather than the unintended. But I think in terms of how we can manage escalation, it got me thinking about how Japan has actually managed gray zone hybrid threats in Senkaku Islands for more than a decade, I think. And as you well know yourself, in say contemporary debates on maritime strategy, there's this focus on persistent presence, right? So making sure that you're there, as former Prime Minister Kishida used to say, Japan will firmly say what needs to be said, but will not be overly provocative. So I think there's a balance that has been struck in terms of how Japan has tried to deploy, persistent presence in its Senkaku Islands, and I think that could maybe also be thought about in terms of the exercises and also with undersea cables. The final point that I just thought of is whether we can also incorporate undersea cables and the exercises around it into say the code for unplanned encounters at sea. So for example, if Japanese exercise is going on with Australia or the US and a Chinese ship unexpectedly appears, how do we expect them to behave? So that might be a more explicit focus on how to respond in these unexpected encounters at sea. And that can also be folded into, and as you well know, the Western Pacific Symposium, where there's all these discussions about how to achieve expected behavior and also norms when you encounter other parties at sea. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the very comprehensive discussion. From the floor, digital floor, we have several questions are collected, particularly on the specific case of submarine cables. So one question, I think there are, yes, many questions, but a question is about international legal framework, and another one is very specific technical issues of kind of a submarine drone. So one question is about the notion, the importance of recognizing a submarine infrastructure as global commons, and how can we set up mechanism for protecting them. So that's that one question. Also, is very specific one about is there any possibility of submarine cable, submarine drone, protecting. So these are a sample of questions. So it's anyone volunteering to answer, respond?
Okay, so the global commons scenario is something that has been talked about, something that I've talked about in my own work on cables. Again, gaining consensus in today's world is extremely difficult. It's not impossible. We just had a major agreement on the world's oceans that was signed a couple of years ago. So we can make international agreements about this. This is one of those options, as I mentioned in my presentation, that is nice to have. Really, it's how do we begin to even build consensus on this? Undersea cables are triply invisible, so we don't even though we rely on them, we don't see them. First of all, they're infrastructure. We generally don't notice infrastructure until it falls apart or until it breaks. Second, it's underwater, and third, they're under the ground, under the water. Okay, so most people don't know undersea cables exist. It's not like, again, Save the Whales or chemical, biological, nuclear weapons bans where we actually saw manifestations of the horror of those. Cables probably aren't going to rise to that level. So until you have an emotive element there, I'm not quite sure that gaining consensus on this is going to be possible. Was the second part of the question was? Oh, it's very specific. Is there any drones? Yeah.
Drones, submarine drone.
Yeah, so I mentioned briefly autonomous systems, deployment of drones, et cetera. This, I think, is still in the realm of classified information. I've heard allusions to this, but I'm really not in a position to answer that question because I don't have access to that data. So that's my short answer on that. The answer is it's in the works, is my understanding.
Any Yeah, of course. If we can develop drones and protecting it, actually it can be used for destroying it. So it's a yes. And also there's been another, general geopolitical question, and it was about the possibility or widely speculated cooperation on this, submarine cable a sabotage between Russia and China. It's widely suspected, but it's difficult to ascertain. But so the question is, what's your understanding of this possible Russia-China cooperation, and what's the possibility of the common protection defense on the side of Indo-Pacific, wider coalition? It's a very big picture. But would you respond to this question?
Sure. So yeah, huge question. I'll respond to it in pieces. Where we've seen what most states agree is our acts of malicious sabotage have occurred in the Baltic or off of Matsu Island in the Taiwan Strait. These are localized areas. Again, this is not sabotage of cables at the high seas, right? Like the Tata TGN cable, for example, stretching from Singapore to Chennai in India. I think there's a reason why it's localized. Again, you're limiting the countries that are affected. There's a common pool of countries. I think because of what's happened in the Baltic, therefore, the Scandinavian states have developed quite a robust system of anti-hybrid warfare techniques, gray zone techniques, but also going so far as to arrest the crew, at least impound the ship, the offending ship until they decide what to do about this. How do you then bring this to the Western Pacific? How do you then bring this to the Indo-Pacific writ large? It's early days yet, and it's anybody's guess. But I think that was the goal or the motivation behind the Quad's initial 2023 announcement about cable connectivity is how do we begin to even address this, and as I think the presentation showed you, but also other research that's been done on cables, this is a very complex system, and it is truly global. And so, yeah, we've got some work to do.
Yeah, I think we often think about the undersea, but I think the response should be, as they say, multi-domain. So the NATO multi-domain activity includes also space satellite surveillance, air surveillance, also electromagnetic domain surveillance as well. So I think it's important to think in a more comprehensive multi-domain approach, rather than just thinking that, oh, it's going to be just the drones. The drones have to be part of a network of data collection and analysis, and occasionally, I think also including AI technologies as well. So I think that the multi-domain component is incredibly important if you want to have a effective sort of response to this issue.
Okay, time is up. So much work to be done. So will be done. So we have a lot of questions and issues on the table, and we continue to grasp and struggle with it. So in concluding, we want to ask Professor Nakayama for your concluding remarks.
Well, distinguished speakers, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I in fact have 1/3 of the time than I anticipated, so I have to avoid the majority of my sentences. First of all, I apologize to the audiences in this meeting room in particular and online for not having enough time to entertain your questions due to our poor management of time. I deeply apologize for it. And as we conclude this seminar, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to everyone who has contributed to today's substantial and provoking discussions. Today's presentations and the panel discussions have illustrated several critical dimensions of maritime security that demand our continued attention and collaborative actions. Then to the final part of my speech, my remarks. I'd like to conclude by thanking the RCAST for co-organizing this event, our distinguished speakers for their invaluable contributions. And last but not certainly least, I'd like to express my deepest appreciation to Professor Ikeuchi for his leadership in making this important event possible. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Nakayama Sensei. So with this, we conclude this program and of the seminar. Thank you very much for everyone to come. Thank you.